Hey guys, it's Mike here, and I just saw Snake Eyes, G.I. Joe Origins, which is the newest entry in the G.I. Joe franchise of movies that acts as an origin story for the Snake Eyes character, while perhaps also being the starter of an entirely new series of movies and new cinematic universe that Hasbro is trying to create. Now overall, I've never really been that big of a G.I. Joe fan. The cartoon was a little bit before my time, and I only really saw a few episodes here and there along the way, although I did glean enough from the show to kind of get an idea of the formula of the Joes going against the evil Cobra, an international terrorist organization led by Cobra Commander who went around hatching schemes in their goal of global domination, only for the Joes, an international team of heroes, to go around foiling them. Now with that being said, I did see the other two G.I. Joe movies that came out before this one, starting with G.I. Joe The Rise of Cobra, which I didn't really care for that much. It was kind of just your run-of-the-mill generic action movie. And the same could be said for G.I. Joe Retaliation, which honestly ended up being even worse. Whether it was the way that they handled the previous characters by pretty much killing all of them off at the start of the movie, or the fact that Bruce Willis obviously shot all of his scenes in like one day and was giving his typical bored performances that he does in recent years, it didn't end up being a movie that really stuck with me, and I'm struggling to remember either of them right now. So with that being said, going into Snake Eyes, I didn't really have much expectations to begin with. I thought maybe it could be an entertaining action movie and serve as kind of an origin that they can use to perhaps refresh or reboot the series if it wasn't a prequel to begin with, which I'm still not entirely sure of. And the fact that it did seem to be going for more of an Eastern style action movie involving martial arts definitely caught my attention. But with that being said, upon seeing this movie, even though I went in with low expectations, it still found a way to sink below them, because ultimately I found this movie to be really boring and unengaging, and almost certainly the worst G.I. Joe movie so far. So with that being said, let's get into the plot of this movie, as it focuses around, as you would expect, Snake Eyes, who begins this movie as a child, as we get his tragic backstory, where he and his father are on the run from some evil characters, only for his father to be killed in the process. However, the young Snake Eyes escapes, and so begins his lifelong journey and mission in order to get revenge upon those who killed his father. Along the way, he joins up with the Yakuza, led by Kenta, played by Takahiro Hira, who promises to tell him who it was who killed his father, however only after he accomplishes some missions for them. In the process, Snake Eyes saves a man named Tommy, and ends up joining him and his clan in Japan in order to train to become a ninja, and inevitably take down Kenta, and bring an end to his plans that could see the destruction of the entire clan in the process. Along the way, Snake Eyes has to make a decision about who he's loyal to, and what his ultimate goal is in life. But will he make the right one? And will it be entertaining along the way? Well, not particularly. But let's get into the things that I liked about this movie, which aren't really that many to begin with. As I would say that some of the casting and performances are pretty good along the way, with Henry Golding being okay as Snake Eyes in the movie, although not necessarily having that charisma of a leading man who can carry an entire film. I would say the same thing for Andrew Koji, who plays Tommy, otherwise known as Storm Shadow, something that they totally spoiled in the trailers. Not that it's really kept subtle throughout the course of the film. And I think that maybe he gave one of the better performances in the movie, and comes across as far more understandable in his motivations than Snake Eyes is at any point during the film. And as expected, Iko Uwais from the Raid movies is really good as the Hardmaster here, despite the fact that he's barely in the movie at all. And the same thing could be said for Peter Mensah as the Blind Master. We also got a cameo early on from WWE wrestler Mojo Rawley during a fight scene, which I thought was pretty funny, considering he seemed to do better here than he ever does in a WWE ring. But honestly, most of the actors and their performances were totally generic. And one of the biggest problems is the fact that during this movie, the majority of the actors and characters are from Japan, and speak English as a second language. And yet, for whatever reason, despite the fact that the majority of the film takes place in Tokyo, we're constantly having to listen to them speak English, which really hampers a lot of their performances. And considering just how much dialogue is in this movie, I wish that they had just bit the bullet and had most of the dialogue being in Japanese with subtitles. I mean, I know at the end of the day this is an American movie that's meant to cater to English-speaking audiences, but seriously, in a movie like this where the majority of actors are from a country that the movie even takes place place in, would it really be so hard just for them to put some subtitles there? I mean, they even have them in a couple scenes, which goes to show you that it's not like The Hunt for Red October where they're all speaking their own language in-universe. They just so happen to be speaking English, which really doesn't make a lot of sense. And of course, this is an action movie, so there are a couple of solid action sequences along the way. Like one scene where Snake Eyes has to take a bowl of water from Iko Uwais without spilling any of the water along the way. And then there's a fight scene on a truck involving swords that reminded me a little bit of Matrix Reloaded, where the characters are jumping all around the truck and trying not to fall off and get killed in the process. But honestly, most of the action scenes in this movie are just ruined by bad cinematography, especially when it comes to shaky cam and fast cutting, where you could barely even see what's happening 90% of the time. I mean, what's the point of having an action movie, especially with talented martial artists, if you're just going to obscure all the action by constantly shaking the cam, like someone with Parkinson's standing in an earthquake, and even during scenes that actually could be pretty good, you just decide to cut a million times during them, which diminishes pretty much any of the action taking place during it. In talking about the action, I have to get into the negatives here because aside from that, there actually isn't really that much action to begin with in this film. I mean, you would think so going in and based on the trailers, but the truth of the matter is that the majority of this movie is just people standing around giving exposition in rooms. Like literally 80% of it is people talking about what's happening, giving their backstories, and then giving explanations for those explanations. They even interrupt action scenes just to give more exposition, and talk about how the characters feel about the people who are involved in that action scene, rather than just showing the action scene and leaving certain things open for interpretation, or just showing it instead of saying it, which, you know, film is a visual medium, so you shouldn't spend the majority of the film talking to the audience like they're idiots, and basically explaining literally every single thing that could possibly happen during it. And despite the fact that this film actually takes itself largely seriously, which is something that I wasn't expecting from a G.I. Joe movie, there's still a lot of goofy lines and moments along the way. Like when Snake Eyes is going through this training, which they tell him will basically be life or death, and they say, and the worst part about it will be hearing you complaining about it. And there's other cringy lines and moments like that along the way that really just don't fit in with the general theme and the tone of the film that they're conveying. Another one of the biggest problems here is that the main character Snake Eyes goes from just being a cage fighter at the beginning of the film, who isn't really even doing that well, to suddenly just being able to fight off entire groups of trained ninjas and warriors, wielding weapons like swords, with barely any explanation or on-screen training. Even the training that he does get on screen simply doesn't explain how he just is suddenly a ninja and this ultimate badass that the character's supposed to be. He can just do it, which makes all of his scenes kind of unbelievable, along with the fact that people are suddenly doing crouching tiger, hidden dragon stunts that come out of nowhere, like jumping 20 feet into the sky and doing all these crazy stunts that we're not really given any adequate explanation for. So in a movie that's supposed to be an action film, despite the fact that there's not really that much in it, all these different elements contribute to making the action ultimately feeling boring as a result, because you can't really get engaged with it when you don't necessarily care about most of the characters who are involved in it, and barely anything that's really happening within those scenes makes sense, or is even able to be made out visually. Another big problem with this film is that it's honestly way too long, being about 2 hours in length, and during that, because of all the exposition and the other things going on, it really drags on, and honestly feels like it's more about 3 hours. A film like this probably could have been 90 minutes in length, considering the story that we're actually given, and there are so many things here and there that could have easily been cut down, or repurposed into giving us more of a care for this character Snake Eyes, and the majority of the other people that are in it. But by the end of it, we don't really care that much about any of them. And when it comes to Snake Eyes himself, the entire film does kind of feel ultimately pointless. Because isn't Snake Eyes supposed to be a character who doesn't really talk and is purposely mysterious from his inception? If so, why did we spend an entire movie giving him an origin story, where he doesn't even wear his Snake Eyes outfit until the very end of the film and is constantly talking? I mean, does he just stop talking and become a completely different character once he puts his iconic outfit on? And if so, then what's the purpose of this movie? Oh right, to start another franchise. Because naturally, they hint at a sequel at the end of the film, in which I honestly have zero interest in seeing, and I doubt will ever even get made because of this film and how it's performing at the box office. Because really, if this movie was actually meant to start a whole franchise, then it might as well be what Tom Cruise's Mummy movie was for the Dark Universe, a non-starter. Because I doubt anyone is going to go see this movie and be so hyped up and so excited and enjoy the film so much that they're going to want to rush out to see another one, let alone an entire franchise built off of it. So I wouldn't be shocked in the least if we see yet another G.I. Joe movie in the future that's pretty much unrelated to this one, that they once again will attempt to use in order to start up yet another franchise that most people probably don't even want to see at this point. After all, G.I. Joe is a property from the 80s, and one that, aside from people of that generation, is mostly just a non-factor at this point. So I doubt it's ever really going to be what Hasbro wants it to be. So overall, Snake Eyes is another boring, dumb American action movie that tries to be something that starts an entire franchise and ultimately fails at that. It's probably the worst G.I. Joe movie so far, which is saying a lot considering the other two weren't very good to begin with. And ultimately, I feel like this movie isn't going to do anything for pretty much anyone other than the producers of the film who are trying to make money off of it, and at the end of the day probably won't make a dime. Make sure to subscribe and enable all notifications so you can stay up to date with all of my videos. Thanks for watching, and make sure to stick around because there's a lot more to come in the future.
Yeah, and you better subscribe.